"Sir, buy my little sister. Her life is at risk." The beggar boy shouted to the millionaire in the hospital while carrying a baby. The millionaire was shocked by the situation, and what he did moved everyone in the hospital. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead in the bustling public hospital corridor as Tommy Martinez dragged his feet forward, clutching a bundle of old rags against his chest. His small frame, barely 8 years old, swayed with exhaustion, but his grip never loosened. Inside those worn fabrics lay his entire world. His baby sister Sophia, barely 3 months old, struggling for each breath. The chaos around him was overwhelming. Nurses rushed past, their shoes squeaking against the worn linoleum floor. Patients lined the walls, some moaning in pain, others staring blankly ahead. The sharp smell of disinfectant burned Tommy's nostrils, but he pressed on, his bare feet, leaving dirty marks on the pristine floor. He had been walking for hours, searching for someone, anyone who could help. His sister's wheezing had gotten worse, and the fever that burned through her tiny body showed no signs of breaking. Tommy knew he was running out of time. Then he saw him. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit was emerging from one of the consultation rooms, his presence commanding attention even in the crowded hallway. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, from his perfectly polished shoes to his austere expression as he checked his gold watch. Without hesitation, Tommy lunged forward, nearly stumbling in his haste. He fell to his knees before the businessman, his voice cracking as he made the most desperate plea of his young life. "Sir, please buy my sister. She'll die if nobody helps." Richard Evans, CEO of Evans Enterprises and one of the city's most prominent business figures, froze mid-step. The raw desperation in the boy's voice cut through his carefully constructed walls of indifference. For a moment, he simply stared at the dirty child at his feet, his mind struggling to process the bizarre request. "Get up, boy," Richard said, his voice stern but not unkind. "You can't sell people. It's not right." He tried to step around Tommy, but the child scrambled to block his path. "Please, sir. I'll do anything. She's so sick and I don't know what else to do." Tommy's arms trembled as he held up the bundle, revealing Sophia's flushed face. "Look at her, please. She's all I have." Richard's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly as he caught sight of the infant's labored breathing. Something about the scene before him stirred long-buried memories, echoes of another child's desperate plea, another time when he had turned away. "Where are your parents?" he asked, already knowing he shouldn't get involved. These situations were never simple, never clean. Tommy's lower lip quivered. "They're gone, sir. It's just us now. We live in the old building by the river. I've been trying to take care of her, but she got sick and I don't know how to make her better." Richard closed his eyes briefly, fighting an internal battle. He had built his empire by making rational decisions, by never letting emotion cloud his judgment. He had passed countless children like Tommy on the streets, had learned to shut out their pleading eyes and outstretched hands. But something was different this time. Perhaps it was the way the boy wasn't begging for himself, but offering the only thing of value he had left in the world. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity in his desperation, or the way he held his sister, as if she were made of precious glass. "Wait here," Richard found himself saying, surprised by his own words. He strode to the nurse's station, his authority naturally commanding attention. Within minutes he had arranged for Sophia to be examined by the hospital's top pediatrician. As they waited outside the examination room, Richard studied Tommy more closely. Despite the dirt and raggedness, there was an unmistakable intelligence in the boy's eyes, a resilience that had kept both him and his sister alive against impossible odds. "You've been taking care of her by yourself?" Richard asked, his voice softer now. Tommy nodded, his eyes never leaving the examination room door. "I feed her milk when I can get it. I wrap her up warm at night. I sing to her when she cries." His voice broke. "But it's not enough, is it? I'm not enough." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He recognized the weight of responsibility in the child's voice, the crushing fear of failure. It was a burden no 8-year-old should have to bear. The doctor emerged, her face grave but determined. Sophia needed immediate treatment, antibiotics, oxygen, proper care. Richard noticed how Tommy's small shoulders slumped with relief when he agreed to cover all expenses. But as he watched the medical team wheel Sophia away for treatment, Richard knew this wasn't over. He couldn't just pay the bill and walk away. The image of Tommy, standing alone in the corridor, lost and uncertain without his sister in his arms, made that impossible. "Show me where you live," Richard heard himself say, even as his rational mind screamed at him to stop, to turn around, to maintain the safe distance he had always kept from others' tragedies. The setting sun cast long shadows across the crumbling facade of the abandoned building, as Richard followed Tommy through a gap in the chain-link fence. Every step took him further from the world he knew, from the comfortable certainties of boardrooms and balance sheets. The boy moved with the confidence of familiarity, navigating broken concrete and twisted metal as if walking through a palace. In a way, Richard supposed, that's exactly what this was, Tommy's palace, where he had carved out a space for himself and his sister in a world that had turned its back on them. "It's up here," Tommy said, leading the way up a staircase that groaned under their weight. "Watch your step, sir. Some of the stairs aren't good anymore." Richard's Italian leather shoes were already ruined, but he barely noticed. His attention was caught by the signs of life amid the decay. A worn blanket carefully folded in a corner, a collection of salvaged toys arranged on a windowsill, a plastic bottle repurposed as a vase for wilting wildflowers. They reached what had once been an office space on the third floor. Tommy had transformed it into a makeshift home, using cardboard boxes to create walls and old newspapers for insulation. In one corner, a nest of clean rags formed a bed where the siblings slept. "Sophia likes it when I make shadow puppets on the wall," Tommy explained, pointing to where moonlight streamed through a broken window. "And when it rains, we can see the whole city light up with lightning." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. The boy spoke of their surroundings with pride, trying to present their desperate situation in the best possible light. It was a skill Richard recognized from his own childhood, though he had spent decades trying to forget those memories. "How long have you been here?" Richard asked, his voice carefully controlled. Tommy's face scrunched up in concentration. "Since the cold time. Sophia was very tiny then." He hesitated, then added in a whisper, "She cried a lot at first. I think she missed Mama's voice." Richard noticed how Tommy avoided mentioning their father, filing away that detail for later. "And you've been taking care of her all this time? By yourself?" The boy nodded, a flash of pride crossing his face. "I learned how to change her diapers. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store sometimes gives me old clothes and tells me how to check if Sophia's fever is too high." His expression fell. But this time nothing worked. She just kept getting sicker. Richard walked to the window, needing a moment to compose himself. The city sprawled below, a maze of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there was his penthouse, apartment, his office tower, his carefully ordered life. Yet here he stood, in an abandoned building with two children who had somehow managed to survive on nothing but determination and love. "Tommy," he said finally, turning back to face the boy, "you can't stay here. It's not safe." Fear flashed across Tommy's face. "Please don't call the people who take kids away. They'll separate us. I promised Sophia I'd never leave her." "No one is separating you," Richard found himself promising, even as he wondered what he was getting himself into. "But your sister needs proper care while she recovers. And you need a safe place to sleep, real food, clean clothes." Tommy's eyes widened with hope, but Richard could see the wariness there too. Life had taught this child to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. "Would you?" Tommy started, then stopped, gathering his courage. "Would you really help us, even though you don't know us?" Richard knelt down to meet Tommy's eyes, surprised by the fierce protectiveness he felt. "Yes, I would, but I need you to trust me." "Can you do that?" Tommy studied him for a long moment, with an intensity that reminded Richard of himself in the boardroom, evaluating a crucial deal. Finally, the boy nodded. "I need to get Sophia's things," he said, moving to gather their meager belongings. From beneath a loose floorboard, he pulled out a battered tin box. Inside was a single photograph, creased and worn but carefully preserved, showing a beautiful young woman holding a newborn Sophia, with Tommy beaming beside them. "That's Mama," Tommy said softly, touching the photo with gentle fingers. "She made me promise to take care of Sophia no matter what." Richard stared at the photograph, noting the woman's kind eyes and warm smile. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. As Tommy carefully tucked the photo back into the box, Richard made a silent vow of his. Only he would protect these children, whatever it took. But he had no idea that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets, challenge everything he thought he knew about family, and force him to confront the very demons he had spent a lifetime running from. Richard's penthouse felt like a different world as he guided Tommy through the elegant foyer. The boy's bare feet sank into plush carpeting, his wide eyes reflecting the crystal chandelier overhead. Every step left a small, dirty footprint, but for once in his life, Richard didn't care about the mess. "Your house is like a castle," Tommy whispered, clutching his tin box closer to his chest. The photograph inside was his most precious possession, the last connection to a life that seemed increasingly distant. "It's just a place," Richard found himself saying, surprised by how empty the perfectly decorated space suddenly felt. "The guest room will be yours for now. It's right next to Sophia's room, so you can check on her whenever you want." Tommy's head snapped up. "Sophia's coming here? But the hospital?" "I've arranged for her to be transferred to private care once she's stable," Richard explained, leading Tommy down the hallway. "The best pediatric nurse in the city will stay with her until she's fully recovered." Tears welled up in Tommy's eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. "Thank you, sir. I don't know how to pay you back, but I'll work really hard. I can clean and I learn fast and—" "Stop," Richard said firmly, kneeling down to meet Tommy's gaze. "You don't need to pay me back. You don't need to earn your place here. Right now you just need to focus on getting cleaned up and rested. Can you do that for me?" Tommy nodded uncertainly, still looking like he expected to wake up from a dream at any moment. Richard led him to the guest bathroom, where he had already asked his housekeeper to leave out clean towels and new clothes. "Everything here is for you to use," Richard explained, showing Tommy how to adjust the water temperature. "Take as long as you need. I'll be right outside if you need anything." As the door closed behind Tommy, Richard leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. What was he doing? He had no experience with children, no idea how to care for a traumatized 8-year-old and his infant sister. His life was structured around meetings and deadlines, not bedtime stories and bottle feedings. The sound of running water mingled with quiet sniffling from behind the door. Richard's chest tightened as he realized Tommy was crying, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of finally being able to let his guard down. Richard's phone buzzed insistently, messages from his assistant, reminders about tomorrow's board meeting, urgent emails requiring his immediate attention. His normal life was calling, demanding that he return to being Richard Evans, the ruthless CEO who had built an empire through cold logic and careful distance. But as he stood there, listening to the muffled sounds of Tommy's tears, he knew he couldn't go back. Something fundamental had shifted inside him the moment that dirty little boy had offered to sell his sister to save her life. The bathroom door creaked open, and Tommy emerged in clothes that were slightly too big, but wonderfully clean. His hair, free from dirt, revealed itself to be a warm brown that reminded Richard of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. "Feel better?" Richard asked, noting how Tommy's shoulders had relaxed slightly, though wariness still lingered in his eyes. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Tommy's stomach growled loudly, and he blushed. "Sorry." "When was the last time you ate?" Richard asked, already, knowing he wouldn't like the answer. Tommy shrugged. "I had some bread yesterday. Mrs. Rodriguez gave me milk for Sophia, but she didn't have any extra food." Richard's jaw clenched. He led Tommy to the kitchen, where his housekeeper had left several covered dishes warming in the oven. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of real hot food, but he hesitated before touching anything. "It's all for you," Richard assured him. "Eat as much as you want." As Tommy carefully filled a plate, Richard noticed how he took small portions of everything, as if afraid of taking too much. Even now, surrounded by abundance, the boy couldn't shake the habits of survival. "Sir," Tommy asked between careful bites, "can we call the hospital just to check on Sophia?" Richard was already pulling out his phone. "Of course, and Tommy, you can call me Richard." The call to the hospital brought good news. Sophia was responding well to treatment, her fever finally breaking. The relief on Tommy's face was profound, years of worry momentarily lifting from his young features. But as Richard watched Tommy finally begin to relax, a nagging thought tugged at his mind. The boy's careful manners, his intelligent eyes, the way he carried himself even in poverty. None of it fit with a child who had simply been abandoned. There was more to this story, much more. And then there was the photograph, the one Tommy guarded so carefully. The woman's face haunted Richard's thoughts, stirring memories he couldn't quite grasp. Who was she, and why did he feel like he should know the answer? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Jennifer, stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "Mr. Evans," Jennifer said, her professional demeanor slipping slightly as she took in the sight of Tommy at the kitchen counter. "I apologize for the late visit, but there's something you need to see immediately." Richard nodded, turning to Tommy. "I need to speak with Jennifer for a moment. Will you be okay here?" Tommy looked between them, then nodded slowly. Can I take some food to save for later?" The question broke Richard's heart all over. Again. "This is your home now, Tommy. The food will always be here when you're hungry. I promise." In his home office, Jennifer handed him a tablet. "Our security team flagged this. Someone's been asking questions about you at the hospital. A man claimed to be a relative of the children you helped today." Richard's blood ran cold as he read the report. A man matching Tommy's father's description had appeared at the hospital shortly after they left, demanding information about Sophia's whereabouts. When denied, he had become aggressive, requiring security to escort him out. "What did he say exactly?" Richard asked, his voice tight. Jennifer consulted her notes. "He said he was their father and had been searching for them. But sir, there's more. He mentioned knowing something about your past, something that would interest the media greatly." Richard's fingers tightened on the tablet. "Get our legal team working on emergency custody papers. I want guards posted at Sophia's hospital room immediately. And Jennifer, no one knows about Tommy being here, not yet." After Jennifer left, Richard returned to the kitchen to find Tommy had fallen asleep at the counter, his small frame finally surrendering to exhaustion. As Richard carefully lifted him to carry him to bed, Tommy stirred slightly. "Don't let him find us," Tommy mumbled in his sleep, his fingers clutching Richard's shirt. "Please don't let him take Sophia." Richard froze, his suspicions confirmed. The children hadn't been abandoned. They had escaped. But from what? And why did their father's threat about Richard's past send such a chill down his spine? Laying Tommy in bed, Richard noticed something had fallen from the boy's pocket. The photograph from the tin box. In the better light of the bedroom, Richard could finally see the woman's face clearly. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Elena Martinez. The name came rushing back, along with a flood of memories he had spent 15 years trying to forget. She had worked for his company in the early days, handling international contracts. She had been brilliant, dedicated, and had discovered something she shouldn't have. The last time he had seen her, she had been pleading with him to help her expose a massive fraud scheme. He had refused, too afraid of losing everything he had built. She had disappeared shortly after, and he had told himself it wasn't his problem. But now, looking at her face in the photograph, the timeline suddenly became clear. This must have been taken just before she vanished, which meant... "Oh God," Richard whispered, staring at Tommy's sleeping face. The intelligent eyes, the careful manner, the familiar features he hadn't wanted to recognize, they all made terrible sense now. His phone buzzed again. "A message from an unknown number. You took something that belongs to me. But I have something that belongs to you too. The truth about what really happened to Elena Martinez. Let's talk." Richard's hand shook as he deleted the message. He looked at Tommy, peaceful in sleep for perhaps the first time in months, and made a decision. He wouldn't run from this, wouldn't turn away like he had 15 years ago. But as he settled into a chair to watch over Tommy's sleep, Richard knew the real battle was just beginning. Somewhere out there, a man who had already hurt these children once was plotting to take them back. And he was armed with a secret that could destroy everything Richard had built. Yet looking at Tommy's face, Richard realized something that surprised him. He didn't care about his empire anymore. For the first time in his life, protecting his wealth and reputation wasn't his priority. These children were. The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows as Richard sat in his home office, staring at Elena's photograph. The memories he'd suppressed for so long now rushed back. With overwhelming clarity, her passionate voice as she'd tried to convince him to do the right thing, the fire in her eyes when he'd refused, the disappointment in her final glance before walking out of his office, and his life forever. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Tommy stood in the doorway, still wearing the oversized pajamas Richard's housekeeper had found for him. "I'm sorry to bother you," Tommy said hesitantly, "but the hospital called your phone. The nurse said Sophia's asking for me." Richard checked his watch, 7 a.m. He'd been so lost in thought he hadn't even heard the call. "Of course, we'll go right after breakfast." He noticed Tommy clutching something behind his back. "What do you have there?" Tommy slowly revealed a worn notebook. I write things down sometimes. Stories for Sophia, things I want to remember. There's something I need to show you." The boy approached Richard's desk, placing the notebook down with trembling hands. As he opened it, Richard saw pages filled with careful, childish handwriting, far more advanced than he would have expected from an 8-year-old. "Mama taught me to write early," Tommy explained, as if reading Richard's thoughts. "She said knowledge was the most important thing anyone could have." He flipped to a specific page, pointing to an entry. "This was the last thing she told me before." Richard leaned forward to read. "My brave Tommy, listen carefully. If anything happens to me, take your sister and run. Don't trust anyone who claims to be family. The truth is in the blue folder at Papa's office. Remember the lullaby, it's the key. I love you both so much. Stay strong. Stay together." Richard's throat tightened. When did she write this? "She didn't write it. She told me, and I wrote it down after, the night before she disappeared." Tommy's voice wavered. "Papa said she left us, but I heard them fighting. He was angry about some papers she found." The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that made Richard's stomach churn. Eleanor must have discovered something big, something worth disappearing for, something worth keeping her children hidden from their own father. "Tommy," Richard said carefully, "do you remember anything about the blue folder your mother mentioned?" The boy's face scrunched in concentration. "It was in Papa's home office. I tried to find it once, but he caught me. Tommy's voice trailed off, his hand unconsciously touching his arm, where Richard now noticed faded bruises. Anger flared in Richard's chest. "He won't hurt you again, Tommy, I promise you that." "But he's looking for us," Tommy whispered. "I heard the nurses talking at the hospital. He came asking about Sophia." "I know," Richard admitted, "but I have people watching over Sophia, and you're safe here. No one knows where you are." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "He always finds us. Every time we try to hide, he finds us. That's why Mama said we had to split up. But I couldn't leave Sophia. I promised to protect her." Richard knelt before Tommy, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me. Your father might have found you before, but things are different now. You have me, and I have resources he can't match. More importantly, I think I might know what your mother was trying to protect." 15 years ago, Elena had come to him with evidence of massive financial fraud within his company. She'd discovered a network of shell companies, fake contracts, and missing millions. Richard had dismissed her concerns, too focused on his company's rapid growth to question where the money was coming from. But Elena hadn't given up. She'd kept digging, and somewhere in that blue folder was proof that could bring down not just Tommy's father, but possibly Richard's entire empire. The lullaby, Tommy said suddenly. Mama said it was the key. She used to sing it every night, but differently each time. Some words were always the same, but others changed. Richard's mind raced. Elena had been brilliant with codes and patterns. Could she have hidden information in a children's song? Can you remember the lullaby? Tommy nodded slowly. I sing it to Sophia every night, but... He hesitated. Papa gets really angry if he hears it. He says it's forbidden. Before Richard could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Jennifer. Security breach at the hospital. Someone's trying to access Sophia's floor using falsified medical credentials. Richard's blood ran cold. Tommy's father was making his move. Get your shoes, Richard told Tommy, already reaching for his car keys. We need to get to your sister, now. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Richard and Tommy rushed toward Sophia's room, their footsteps echoing off the sterile walls. Richard's security team had already moved the baby to a secure floor, but the knowledge that her father had gotten this close sent chills down his spine. Tommy's small hand gripped Richard's tightly as they approached the new room. Through the window they could see Sophia sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding around her. The private nurse Richard had hired sat beside the crib, alert and watchful. She looks better, Tommy whispered, pressing his hand against the glass. The baby's color had improved significantly, and her breathing was stronger. Can I go in? Richard nodded to the security guard, who opened the door for them. Tommy immediately went to his sister, his gentle hands adjusting her blanket with practiced care. Hey, Sophia, he murmured. I missed you. The baby stirred at his voice, her tiny fingers wrapping around his hand. Richard's phone vibrated. Another message from the unknown number. Hiding them won't change anything. You think you're protecting them, but you're just postponing the inevitable. Remember Elena's choice. His hands clenched around the phone. Elena's choice. The words struck him like a physical blow, carrying him back to that final conversation in his office. You have to make a choice, Richard, she had said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. This isn't just about money anymore. Lives are at stake. He had chosen wrong that day. He had chosen his empire over justice, his comfort over truth, and Elena had paid the price. Mr. Evans? The nurse's voice pulled him back to the present. The baby's medication schedule. She handed him a detailed chart, but Richard noticed, her hands trembling slightly. Is everything all right? He asked quietly, moving away from Tommy. The nurse glanced nervously at the door. A man came by earlier before the security alert. He said he was from hospital administration, asking about transfer papers for the baby. Something felt off, so I called security, but she hesitated. He knew things, details about the baby's, a condition that weren't in her chart. Richard's mind raced. Someone on the inside must be helping Tommy's father. But who? He had personally vetted all the medical staff involved in Sophia's care. A soft melody interrupted his thoughts. Tommy was singing to Sophia, his voice barely above a whisper. Moonlight dancing, secrets hiding, numbers flowing like the tide, 2, 3, 5 in darkness riding, find the place where truth resides. Richard froze. The numbers in the song, they seemed random, but Elena had been a master of patterns. Could this be what she meant about the lullaby being the key? Tommy, he called softly. Does the song always use those numbers? The boy looked up, surprised. No, Mama changed. Them sometimes, but she made me memorize certain ones. She said they were special. Before Richard could ask more, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Jennifer. Sir, we have a problem. Someone's accessing our secure servers using old credentials, Elena Martinez's credentials. Richard's blood ran cold. Those credentials should have been deactivated years ago. Unless, Jennifer, I need you to check something. The access attempts, what numbers are they using? There was a pause. 235, sir. Repeating in different combinations. The lullaby. Eleanor hadn't just hidden information. She'd hidden access codes in a children's song, knowing her son would remember them perfectly. Tommy, Richard said urgently, what other numbers do? You remember from the song? But before Tommy could answer, The lights in the hospital corridor flickered and went out. Emergency generators hummed to life, casting everything in a dim red glow. Through the window, Richard saw figures moving in the darkness, multiple shadows approaching with purpose. The nurse reached for the emergency call button, but Richard grabbed her hand. "Don't. We don't know who we can trust." He moved quickly, lifting Sophia from her crib while gently pulling Tommy close. "We need to go. Now." "But where?" Tommy asked, his voice trembling as he helped wrap Sophia securely in her blanket. Richard thought of Elena's words. Find the place where truth resides. After 15 years, he finally understood what she had been trying to tell him. "We're going to my office," he said, leading them toward a service elevator his security team had secured. "The real one where I started my company, where your mother worked, where she hid the blue folder." As the elevator doors closed, Richard caught a glimpse of men entering Sophia's room. They were running out of time, but for the first time they had a real lead. The truth was waiting for them, hidden in plain sight for 15 years. The question was, could they reach it before Tommy's father caught up with them? The old Evans Enterprises building stood in stark contrast to the gleaming skyscraper that now served as the company's headquarters. Located in the city's industrial district, the converted warehouse held the humble beginnings of Richard's empire and possibly the key to Elena's disappearance. Richard parked his car in a hidden service entrance, carefully lifting a sleeping Sophia while Tommy stayed close to his side. The night security guard, an elderly man named Frank, who had worked there since the company's founding, raised his eyebrows at the unusual group, but said nothing as he let them in. "The emergency power should still work," Richard said, leading them through dark corridors. Their footsteps echoed off bare concrete walls, stirring memories he'd long suppressed. This was where it had all started, where he'd built his first success, where he'd first met Elena, and where he'd made the decision that had haunted him for 15 years. Tommy looked around with wide eyes. "Mama worked here?" "Yes," Richard replied, approaching a heavy door marked Archives. This was her office. He gestured to a small room filled with filing cabinets. "She handled all our international contracts from this very desk." The boy walked slowly into the space, his hand trailing along the dusty desktop. "It feels like her," he whispered. "She used to smell like old papers and coffee." Richard's throat tightened as he watched Tommy explore the office. Sophia stirred in his arms, making soft baby sounds in her sleep. The weight of her tiny body, the trust with which she curled against his chest, made his next words even more difficult. "Tommy, there's something I need to tell you," he began, settling into Elena's old chair. "Something about your mother and about my part in what happened to her." But before he could continue, Tommy's attention snapped to something on the wall. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing to a faded children's drawing pinned to a corkboard. "I drew that." Richard moved closer, shifting Sophia gently. The drawing showed stick figures, a woman with long dark hair, a small boy, and a circle that might have been a baby. Written across the top in Elena's elegant handwriting were the words, "My reasons." "I was 4, Tommy explained, touching the paper carefully. "Mama kept it here to remind her why she was working so hard." His voice caught. "She said we were her reason for everything." Richard stared at the drawing, remembering how Elena had always kept it in view while she worked. Even when she'd discovered the irregularities in the company's accounts, even when she'd been gathering evidence of the fraud, she'd kept this simple reminder of what she was fighting for. "The blue folder," Tommy said suddenly. "It has to be here somewhere." He began opening drawers, his small hands moving with desperate purpose. Richard set Sophia down in Elena's old chair, cushioning her with his jacket, and joined the search. They combed through years of archived documents, but found nothing matching Elena's description. "Wait," Tommy said, freezing in place. "The lullaby, Mama always emphasized certain words when she sang about hiding things." He closed his eyes, concentrating hard. "Above the tide, beneath the moon, behind the stars we hide our tune." Richard looked up at the ceiling, understanding dawning. The ceiling tiles. Elena always said the best hiding place was in plain sight. He quickly found a stepladder in the corner and climbed up. The ceiling tiles were standard office panels, but one near Elena's desk was slightly discolored. Richard pushed it aside and reached into the dark space above. His fingers touched something. A folder. As he pulled it down, a photo slipped out. Elena with a much younger Tommy standing in front of a small house. On the back was written an address and a series of numbers matching the ones from the lullaby. "I remember that place," Tommy said, his voice trembling. "It was before Papa changed, before Mama found the bad things he was doing." Richard opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were documents, USB drives, and a sealed envelope with his name on it. But what caught his attention was a small, red notebook, its pages filled with Elena's handwriting. As he began to read, his face drained of color. "Oh God," he whispered. The evidence was far worse than he'd imagined. The fraud hadn't just been about money. It was about human trafficking, about using the company's legitimate shipping contracts to hide something much darker. A sound at the door made them both jump. Frank, the security guard, stood there, but his familiar, friendly expression was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I really wish you hadn't found that," he said, reaching inside his jacket. "The boss has been waiting 15 years to get those documents back." Richard's blood ran cold as he realized their mistake. Frank wasn't just a loyal employee. He was working for Tommy's father, and they were trapped. Time seemed to slow as Richard assessed their situation. The archive room had no other exits. Sophia was still sleeping in Elena's chair. Tommy stood, frozen beside the filing cabinets, and Frank blocked their only escape route. "The folder, Mr. Evans," Frank said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Just hand it over, and we can all walk away from this. No one needs to get hurt." Richard's mind raced. He needed to keep the children safe, but he couldn't let these documents be destroyed. Not again. Not after what Eleanor had sacrificed to preserve them. "Tommy," he said quietly, "take your sister and hide behind the desk." The boy moved swiftly, scooping up Sophia with practiced care. But instead of hiding, he stood his ground. "No," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "Mama told me to never run from the truth again." Frank's face twisted into an ugly smile. "Such a brave boy, just like your mother. She was brave too, right until the end." "She's alive," Tommy shot back, though his voice wavered. "I know she is. She promised she'd come back for us." "Tommy's right," Richard said, stepping forward to shield the children. "Elena's too smart to be silenced. That's why she left these breadcrumbs, why she taught Tommy the lullaby. She knew someday we'd put it all together." Frank's laugh was hollow. "You still don't get it, do you? Why do you think the boss let you take the kids? Why do you think he waited so long to make his move?" The realization hit Richard like a physical blow. They'd been played from the start. Tommy's father had wanted them to find the documents, to lead him straight to the evidence he'd spent 15 years trying to locate. "He used his own children as bait," Richard said, disgust rising in his throat. "Business is business," Frank shrugged. "Now last chance, the folder." But Richard had noticed something Frank hadn't. Tommy was singing softly, almost under his breath. The lullaby, but different numbers this time, and something was happening in response. The old security system, the one Elena had helped design 15 years ago, suddenly sprang to life. Emergency lights began flashing, and a loud alarm blared through the building. Frank's composure cracked. "What did you do?" "Mama built back doors into everything," Tommy said, a fierce pride in his voice. "She taught me how to use them. The numbers aren't just a code, they're commands." Richard didn't waste the opportunity. He lunged forward, catching Frank off guard. The struggle was brief but intense. The folder scattered across the floor, papers flying everywhere. But Richard managed to knock Frank down. Tommy quickly gathered the scattered documents, while Richard used his tie to secure Frank's hands. Sophia, awakened by the chaos, began to cry. "It's okay, Sophia," Tommy soothed, balancing documents and baby with remarkable skill. "We're going to find Mama now. For real this time." Richard gathered the remaining papers, quickly checking that all the crucial evidence was intact. Among them, he found a photograph he hadn't noticed before. Eleanor standing in front of a small cafe, dated just 6 months ago. "She's in Costa Rica," Tommy said, looking at the photo over Richard's shoulder. "That's what the last numbers in the lullaby mean. Coordinates." More footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Richard's security team responding to the alarm, but they couldn't be sure who was really on their side anymore. "There's a back way out," Richard said, remembering the building's old layout. "Through the maintenance tunnels. They lead to the subway station 3 blocks away." Tommy nodded, already moving. The boy had spent his whole life running, hiding, surviving. But this time was different. This time they weren't running away from something. They were running toward someone. As they hurried through the dark tunnel, Sophia clutched safely between them. Richard made a silent vow. He would make this right. He would help Tommy find his mother, expose the truth, and take down the corruption that had torn this family apart. But first, they had to survive the night. And somewhere above them, Tommy's father was mobilizing every resource at his disposal to stop them. The race to reach Elena had begun. The maintenance tunnels beneath the old Evans building were a maze of darkness and echoing footsteps. Richard led the way, his phone's flashlight casting long shadows on the damp walls. Tommy followed close, behind, humming softly to keep Sophia calm in the darkness. "Are they still following us?" Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant rumble of subway trains. Richard pressed his finger to his lips, listening intently. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but he couldn't be sure if that was good news or bad news. Frank's people might have lost their trail, or they might be setting up an ambush ahead. "We need to be careful," Richard said softly. "Your father's men could be anywhere." Tommy's face hardened at the mention of his father. "He's not my father anymore. Not after what he did to Mama." They reached a junction where 3 tunnels converged. Richard hesitated, trying to remember the old building plans. A wrong turn here could trap them in a dead end. "Wait," Tommy said, studying the walls. "Look at this." He pointed to what appeared to be random scratches in the concrete. But as Richard looked closer, he realized they formed a pattern, numbers similar to the ones in Elena's lullaby. "Your mother left markers," Richard breathed, amazed once again by Elena's foresight. "She must have used these tunnels." Tommy nodded excitedly. "She told me stories about secret passages, but I thought they were just bedtime tales. She said if we ever got separated, follow the numbers, and they'd lead to her." Richard examined the markings more carefully. They weren't just directions, they were dates. Eleanor had been here recently, updating the markers. She was leaving them a trail. Sophia chose that moment to let out a hungry cry, the sound echoing alarmingly through the tunnels. Tommy quickly pulled out a bottle from his backpack. He had thought to grab supplies during their escape. "Shh, Sophia," he whispered, feeding his sister with practiced care. "We have to be quiet now, like when we played hide and seek with Mama." Richard watched the boy tend to his sister, marveling at his resilience. Tommy had been forced to grow up too fast, but he had never lost his gentleness, his capacity for love. A distant sound made them all freeze, voices growing closer. Richard quickly guided them into a small maintenance alcove, pressing back against the cold wall. Sophia, as if sensing the danger, fell silent. "They went this way," a gruff voice called. "The baby's cry came from down here." "The boss wants—" "Are them alive?" another voice responded. "Especially the boy, he knows the codes." Tommy's hand found Richard's in the darkness, squeezing tight. Richard squeezed back, trying to convey reassurance he didn't quite feel. They were running out of options. But then Tommy started humming again, not the lullaby this time, but a different tune. His free hand traced the numbers on the wall, following a pattern only he could see. Suddenly, a section of the wall behind them shifted with a quiet, grinding sound. A hidden door swung open, revealing a narrow passage. "Mama's escape route," Tommy whispered, his eyes shining with triumph. "She said there were secrets in the walls, ways to disappear if the bad men ever found us." Richard didn't hesitate. They slipped through the opening, just as flashlight beams swept the tunnel they'd vacated. The hidden door closed silently behind them, leaving no trace of their passage. The new tunnel was different, cleaner, clearly maintained. Small emergency lights glowed at regular intervals, casting a soft blue glow that reminded Richard of Elena's office. "Look," Tommy said, pointing to a small electronic panel on the wall. It had a keypad and a screen displaying a single word, "Welcome." Richard recognized the technology. It was an early prototype of his company's security system, one Elena had helped design. But this version had never been officially released. She built her own network, Richard realized, right under our feet. All these years she's been watching, waiting, protecting her children from the shadows. Tommy approached the keypad with confidence. "Mama said when we found her secret path we should follow the starlight home." His fingers moved surely over the keys, inputting numbers from memory. The lullaby wasn't just about hiding, it was about finding our way back to her. The screen flickered, then displayed new text. "Identity confirmed. Welcome home, Tommy." Lights came on further down the tunnel, revealing a path forward. But more importantly, a small printer built into the wall hummed to life, producing a single photograph. Richard's hands shook as he took the picture. It showed Elena, looking older but very much alive, standing in front of a familiar building, the small cafe from the Costa Rica photo. But this image was dated just 1 week ago, and written on the back was a message. "My darlings, you're so close now. Follow the blue lights. I'm waiting." The hidden tunnel system was a marvel of engineering and foresight. As they followed the blue lights, Richard couldn't help but admire Elena's brilliance. She hadn't just created an escape route, she'd built an entire underground network, complete with security checkpoints and safe rooms. "Mama called it her digital labyrinth," Tommy explained as they walked. "She said it was like the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, but with computers instead of string to guide us home." They passed through another security checkpoint, where Tommy's voice pattern unlocked the door. The system was sophisticated, yet clearly designed for a child to use, another testament to Elena's careful planning. "Did you know about all of this?" Richard asked, watching Tommy navigate the security measures with practiced ease. The boy shook his head. "Not really. Mama taught me the songs and numbers like games. She said one day they'd make sense, that they'd help me find her when it was safe." Sophia had fallen asleep again, peaceful in the gentle blue light. Richard adjusted her blanket, marveling at how quickly he'd grown attached to these children. The thought of losing them now was unbearable. They reached what appeared to be a control room of sorts. Monitors lined the walls, showing security feeds from various locations, including, Richard noticed with a start, his own office building. "She's been watching," he said softly. "All this time she's been keeping track of everything." Tommy moved to a central console, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Mama said when we found this place we should wake up the sleeping giant." He began to type, entering more numbers from his seemingly endless supply of memorized codes. The screens flickered, then came alive with data. Files began opening, revealing years of accumulated evidence. Not just about the fraud Richard had discovered, but about a vast network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of corporate and government power. "Your father," Richard said, scanning the documents, "he wasn't just using my company for fraud. He was using it as cover for something much bigger." Tommy nodded grimly. "Mama found out he was hurting people. Lots of people. That's why she had to hide us." A new window popped up on the main screen, a video file. The timestamp showed. It was recorded just hours ago. Tommy's hand trembled as he clicked play. Elena's face filled the screen, older but still beautiful, her eyes carrying the same determination Richard remembered. "My darling boy," she began, "if you're watching. This, you found your way to the heart of my labyrinth. You've grown so strong, so brave. I've been watching over you and Sophia every day, waiting for the right moment to bring you home." She paused, her expression growing serious. "Richard, I know you're there too. Thank you for protecting my children. I always knew that when the time came, you'd make the right choice. Now I need you both to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you will change everything." The video continued, revealing the full scope of what Elena had uncovered. The fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Tommy's father had built a shadow empire, using legitimate businesses as fronts for human trafficking, illegal tech deals, and political manipulation. "The evidence is all here," Elena explained. "Everything needed to bring down the entire network. But it has to be released carefully, strategically. If we make one wrong move, they'll bury it all again." She leaned closer to the camera. "Tommy, sweetheart, remember the final verse of our lullaby? The one about the phoenix rising. It's time, enter the last sequence." Tommy closed his eyes, recalling the melody. His fingers moved across the keyboard, entering a complex series of numbers. The system responded immediately, screens filling. With new data. "It's a dead man's switch," Richard realized. "If anything happens to us, everything gets released to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the world." "More than that," Tommy said, pointing to a flashing indicator. "Look, it's sending something now. A message." Text appeared. On the screen. "Protocol Phoenix activated. Extraction team en route, hold position." The sound of helicopters suddenly filled the air, audible even through layers of concrete. On one of the security monitors, they could see tactical teams rappelling down the sides of the building above. "FBI clear." The shouts echoed through the tunnel system. Tommy's eyes filled with tears of relief. She did it. Mama really did. Have a plan. But Richard's attention was caught by a different monitor, one showing Tommy's father being led away in handcuffs from his office across town. The man's face was contorted with rage as he looked directly into the security camera. "It's not over," Richard said quietly. "Men like him, they have contingency plans, other people ready to take their place. That's why we have to disappear for a while," a familiar voice said from behind them. They turned to find Elena standing in the doorway, looking exactly like her recent photograph. Her eyes were fixed on her children, tears streaming down her face. "Mama?" Tommy whispered, hardly daring to believe it was real. Elena opened her arms and Tommy ran to her, Sophia still cradled carefully in his embrace. The family was finally reunited, but Richard knew their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The safe house Elena had prepared was a modest beach house on a private stretch of coastline, far from the city's chaos. As dawn broke over the horizon, Richard watched Tommy and Sophia sleep, peacefully for the first time in months, their mother keeping vigilant watch beside them. "They've grown so much," Elena whispered, gently stroking Sophia's hair. "I missed so many moments, but I saw everything through my cameras. Every time Tommy sang to her, every smile, every tear." Richard stood by the window, keeping watch out of habit. The FBI had assured them this location was secure, but years of corporate politics had taught him to never take safety for granted. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked, the question that had been burning in his mind since their reunion. "I could have helped you." Elena's eyes met his, carrying years of unspoken pain. "Could you have? 15 years ago, when I brought you evidence of the fraud, you chose your company over the truth. I needed to be sure you'd changed before I could trust you with my children's lives." The words stung, but Richard couldn't deny their truth. "I was a different person then, scared of losing everything I'd built." "And now," Eleanor asked softly, "you've risked that same empire to protect my children. Why?" Before Richard could answer, Tommy stirred in his sleep, murmuring fragments of the lullaby. Eleanor immediately went to him, her hand smoothing his furrowed. "Proud to see the numbers," she said, turning back to Richard. "Did you figure them out, what they really mean?" Richard shook his head. "Some kind of code, obviously. Security protocols, coordinates." "More than that," Elena interrupted, moving to a laptop on the kitchen counter. "The numbers in the lullaby aren't just codes. They're a key to unraveling the entire network. Each sequence corresponds to a different type of transaction, a different shell company, a different victim." She pulled up files showing Richard the true scope of her investigation. "Your company was just one piece of the puzzle. They used your shipping routes, your contracts, your reputation as cover for something much bigger. Human trafficking was just the beginning." Richard's stomach churned as he read through the documents. The corruption reached into every level of society, Politicians, judges, business leaders, people he had dined with, made deals with, trusted. "There's something else," Eleanor said hesitantly. "Something I discovered just before I had to disappear. It's about your father." Richard's head snapped up. "My father? He's been gone for 20 years. That's what they wanted you to believe." Eleanor's fingers flew over the keyboard, bringing up an old newspaper article. "Your father didn't walk away from the company because he was sick. He was forced out because he discovered the same thing I did." The article showed a photo of Richard's father outside a courthouse, dated just weeks before his supposed retirement. But it was the man standing behind him that caught Richard's attention. Tommy's father, 20 years younger but unmistakable. "They threatened your family," Elena continued softly. "Your father chose exile to protect you, just like I chose to hide to protect my children." Richard sank into a chair, his world tilting on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about his past, about his rise to power, was built on lies. "There's more," Elena said, but a sound from outside made her freeze. Breaking waves couldn't quite mask the crunch of tires on gravel. They moved in perfect sync, Elena gathering the children while Richard checked the security feeds. The cameras showed 3 black SUVs approaching the house, their windows tinted. FBI. "Vehicles," Richard noted, "but something's wrong. Look at the driving pattern. They're not following standard protocol." Elena was already moving, guide Tommy and Sophia, toward a hidden panic room. "They found us. Somehow they got to someone inside the FBI." "Get them to safety," Richard said, grabbing the laptop and a go bag Elena had prepared. "I'll hold them off." But Tommy stopped at the panic room door, his eyes wide with fear. "No, we can't split up again. The lullaby says we have to stay together." Elena and Richard exchanged glances, years of unspoken history passing between them in an instant. The boy was right. Dividing had nearly destroyed this family once before. "Together then," Elena decided, pulling a small device from her pocket. "But we're not running. It's time to activate Protocol Sundown." Tommy's eyes lit up with understanding. "The final failsafe? But Mama, you said that was only for when we're ready to end this once and for all," Elena finished. "Richard, are you with us?" Richard looked at this makeshift family, the woman he had failed once before, the children who had brought him redemption, the truth that had waited 15 years to be told. "Together," he said firmly, as the sound of footsteps approached the front door. Eleanor's fingers moved swiftly over the device, a specially modified tablet that looked innocent enough but contained the power to bring down empires. Tommy stood beside her, instinctively understanding what she needed, reciting strings of numbers from the lullaby that now revealed their true purpose as encryption keys. "The first wave goes to social media," Elena explained as she worked. "Thousands of bot accounts we've had dormant for years, each programmed to release specific pieces of evidence. They can't stop them all." Richard cradled Sophia, keeping her quiet as heavy footsteps circled the house. Through the windows he could see figures in FBI jackets taking up positions, but their movements were wrong. Too aggressive, too uncoordinated. For real federal agents. "Second wave targets financial markets," Elena continued. "Every fraudulent transaction, every shell company, every bribe, all exposed simultaneously. The entire network will collapse within hours." "And the third wave?" Richard asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Justice," Tommy said, solemnly, his young voice carrying the weight of years of hiding. "Mama built a special program. It finds the people they hurt and helps them get home." A loud knock at the door made Sophia whimper. Richard held her closer, humming softly. He had learned the lullaby too over these past few days. "Federal. Agents, open up." Elena's smile was fierce as she pressed the final sequence. "They're too late. Protocol Sundown is already activated. In 3 minutes, everything goes public." The door burst open and men in tactical gear poured in. But Elena, Richard and the children made no move to run. They stood together, facing their attackers with calm determination. "Step away from the computer," the lead agent ordered, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. "It's over." "You're right," Elena agreed, holding up the tablet so they could see the countdown. It is over, but not the way you think. The fake agents' radios crackled with urgent voices. Across the city, across the world, the truth was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. Eleanor's digital wildfire was consuming 15 years of carefully constructed lies. "You can't stop it," Tommy said, standing tall beside his mother. The lullaby was never just a song, it was a key to set everyone free. The lead agent's facade cracked. He reached for his radio, speaking urgently. "Sir, we're too late. They've activated some kind of protocol. Everything's going public." Through the radio came a voice Richard recognized, Tommy's father, supposedly in custody but clearly still pulling strings. "Then terminate the protocol. Terminate them all." But before anyone could move, real sirens filled the air. Through the windows, they could see genuine FBI vehicles approaching, along with news vans and what looked like half the law enforcement agencies in the state. "Right on time," Elena said softly. "Protocol Sundown doesn't just release information, it sends out a distress call to every legitimate law enforcement agency within range. I've learned a few things about building networks of my own over the years." The fake agents looked at each other uncertainly, their weapons lowering. They knew they were trapped. "It's your choice now," Richard told them, his voice carrying the authority of years in the corporate world. "Surrender to the real FBI and cooperate, or go down with your masters. But whatever you decide, you can't hurt this family anymore." Tommy moved closer to Elena, taking Sophia from Richard's arms. The baby was fully awake now, but strangely calm, as if she too understood that something momentous was happening. "The lullaby has one more verse," Tommy said, looking up at his mother. "The one about the sunrise. Can we sing it now?" Elena's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. Together, their voices joined in a melody that was no longer about hiding, but about emerging into the light. Richard found himself humming along, his deep voice harmonizing with theirs, as the sound of justice arriving filled the air outside. The countdown on Elena's tablet reached 0, and the world began to change. The aftermath of Protocol Sundown unfolded like a digital tsunami. News alerts flooded every screen, social media exploded with revelations, and the financial markets went into freefall as the corrupt empire began to crumble. Inside the beach house, now secured by legitimate FBI agents, Elena watched it all, unfold on multiple screens while Tommy slept with his head in her lap. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly to Richard, who stood beside her reviewing the chaos. 15 years of preparation all coming together perfectly. Richard nodded, still processing the scope of Elena's plan. "You didn't just gather evidence. You built a complete shadow network to counter theirs. Every corrupt connection they made you matched with a legitimate one." "I had to," Eleanor replied, gently stroking Tommy's hair. "They had power, money, influence. I needed something stronger. Truth, justice, and the unbreakable love of a mother for her children." Sophia stirred in her portable crib, and Richard automatically moved to check on her. The ease with which he had fallen into caring for these children still surprised him. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked Elena. "You knew I would help them when Tommy came to the hospital." Elena's smile was gentle but knowing. "I hoped. I'd been watching you for years, seeing how the weight of your secrets wore on you. When Tommy told me about a kind man in an expensive suit who couldn't turn away from a crying baby, I knew my waiting was over." A senior FBI agent entered the room, her face grave but respectful. "Ms. Martinez, we've confirmed your intel was accurate. Arrests are being made across 12 countries. But," she hesitated, "we've lost contact with the transport carrying James Martinez, Tommy's father." Richard felt his fists clench. "He escaped?" "No," Elena said calmly, her eyes on one of her screens. "He's exactly where I expected him to be. The transport losing contact was part of the plan." Richard and the FBI agent both stared at her. Elena continued typing, bringing up a new set of surveillance feeds. "James thinks he's being rescued by his backup team. In reality, they're my people, leading him straight to his own hidden vault of evidence." On the screen, They watched as a group of armed men escorted James Martinez into a secure facility. His face showed triumph, believing he was about to retrieve his insurance policy against prosecution. "In about 2 minutes," Elena explained, "he'll open his vault and find it empty. Everything he thought was safely hidden has already been copied and distributed, and in his rage he'll reveal the location of the one piece of evidence we still need." Right on cue, James began shouting at his supposed rescuers, his composure completely shattered. In his ranting, he mentioned a specific safety deposit box at a bank in Switzerland. The FBI agent was already on her radio, coordinating with international authorities. But Richard noticed something else. Tommy was awake, watching the screen, with wide eyes. "It's really over?" the boy asked, his voice small. "He can't hurt us anymore?" Elena hugged him close. "It's over, my brave boy. All those numbers you memorized, all those songs we sang, they were pieces of the puzzle. You helped bring down the bad men by simply remembering your lullaby." Tommy's face brightened with pride, but then turned serious. "What about Mr. Evans? Will he have to go away like Papa?" Richard felt his heart stop. In the chaos of exposure, his own role in the original cover-up would surely come to light. He had been complicit, even if by inaction rather than direct involvement. But Elena was already shaking her head. Richard made his choice when he chose to protect you children. His testimony about the original fraud, combined with his recent assistance, grants him immunity. The prosecutor agreed weeks ago. "You thought of everything," Richard said, amazed once again by her foresight. "Almost everything," Eleanor admitted. "I didn't expect—" She paused, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I didn't expect you to become so important to us." The moment was interrupted by Sophia's happy gurgle. The baby was reaching out to Richard, her tiny hands grasping at the air. Without thinking, he lifted her up and she immediately snuggled into his shoulder. "See?" Tommy said wisely. "Sophia knows he's family now." The word family hung in the air between them, full of possibility. But before anyone could respond, Elena's screens lit up with a new alert. The Swiss bank vault had been opened, revealing the final piece of evidence, a complete list of every person involved in the trafficking network, including powerful names that had so far remained hidden. "Launch the final protocol?" Tommy asked, already moving to the computer. Eleanor looked at Richard, a question in her eyes. He nodded, understanding what she was really asking. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "Launch it," Eleanor confirmed. "It's time for the whole truth to come out." The sun was setting over the ocean when the last of the FBI agents finally left the beach house. The day's events had made headlines worldwide. Corrupt networks exposed, trafficking victims rescued, powerful figures led away in handcuffs. But inside the house, a different kind of revolution was taking place. "I think she's finally asleep," Richard whispered, returning from putting Sophia down in her crib. He found Elena and Tommy in the kitchen, making hot chocolate together as if they'd never been separated. "She always sleeps better when you're the one who puts her to bed," Tommy observed, stirring marshmallows into his cup. "Mama says it's because you have a calm energy." Elena smiled, passing Richard a mug of his own. "My son has become quite observant during our time apart. He notices everything." "I had to," Tommy said simply, "to stay safe, to protect Sophia." He paused, looking between the adults. "But we don't have to hide anymore, right? We can be a real family now?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Eleanor set down her mug, kneeling before her son. "Tommy, we've always been a real family. Distance and danger couldn't change that, but you're right, things can be different now." "Better," Tommy insisted. "With Richard, too. He makes you smile like in the old pictures." Elena blushed slightly, catching Richard's eye. He felt his heart skip a beat, remembering all the moments over the past few weeks that had brought them to this point. "Your mother and I have a lot to talk about," Richard said carefully. "A lot to figure out." "But you'll stay," Tommy pressed. "You won't go back to your big empty tower?" Richard thought about his penthouse apartment, his corporate office, the life he'd built around wealth and power. It all seemed hollow now, compared to the warmth of this kitchen and the love in this room. Actually, Elena interjected, we all need to make some decisions. She pulled out her tablet, showing them a series of properties. The beach house was just a temporary safe house. Now that everything's in the open, we need to think about where we want to build our future. Tommy leaned forward, studying the images. These are all near the ocean. I thought we could use a fresh start, Elena explained. Somewhere peaceful, where Sophia can grow up playing in the sand, where you can go to a real school, make friends. Where we can all heal, Richard added softly. Elena's eyes met his, filled with warmth and something more. Yes, all of us. Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing. But what about your company, Richard? And Mama's computer network? Don't you have to stay in the city? Richard laughed. Companies can be run from anywhere these days. And your mother's network? Well, I think she's proven she can monitor anything from any location. Besides, Elena added, the most important network isn't digital. It's the connections between people who love each other, who protect each other. Like us, Tommy said confidently. Then he yawned, the day's excitement finally catching up with him. Time for bed, young man, Elena said, standing up. We have a big day tomorrow. As she led Tommy to his room, Richard moved to the window, watching the waves crash against the shore. So much had changed in such a short time. His company would need restructuring, his life would need rebuilding, but for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Elena returned a few minutes later, standing beside him at the window. Penny, for your thoughts? I was just thinking about choices, Richard replied. 15 years ago, I made the wrong one. I chose safety over justice, security over truth. And now? Now I choose family, he said simply. If you'll have me. Elena's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. I think that choice was made the moment you helped a desperate little boy save his sister. From down the hall came the soft sound of Tommy singing the lullaby to himself as he fell asleep. But the words were different now. Not about hiding and running, but about home and love and new beginnings. We'll need to be careful, Elena warned. There are still people out there who lost everything today. They might seek revenge. Richard squeezed her hand. Let them try. We're stronger together than they could ever be alone. A baby monitor on the counter lit up as Sophia made a small sound in her sleep. They both turned to look at it, then at each other, sharing a smile that held all the promise of tomorrow. 3 months had passed since Protocol Sundown, and the world was still adjusting to its revelations. In a cozy beachfront home on a private stretch of coastline, Richard sat at his new home office reviewing the latest reports from his company's restructuring. The sound of laughter drew his attention to the window. On the beach below, Tommy was teaching Sophia to build sandcastles, while Elena watched from a beach chair, her laptop never far from reach. The scene was so peaceful, it was almost possible to forget the storms they'd weathered to get here. Almost. His phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer, his ever-reliable assistant. Urgent news. James Martinez was found. Richard's heart raced as he opened the attached article. After escaping during the chaos of Protocol Sundown's activation, Tommy's father had vanished. Now, 3 months later, he had been discovered trying to cross the Canadian border with false documents. You're worried, Elena's voice came from the doorway. She had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong. James was caught, Richard said simply, showing her the message. They're bringing him in. Elena's face remained calm, but her hands tightened slightly on her laptop. We knew this would happen eventually. He's too arrogant to stay hidden forever. Should we tell Tommy? Tell me what? Tommy stood in the doorway, sand still clinging to his feet. His face had filled out in the past months, healthy food and regular meals replacing the gaunt look of his hiding days. Elena and Richard exchanged glances. They had promised never to lie to the children, to always treat them with the respect they'd earned through their bravery. They found your father, Elena said gently. He's in custody. Tommy absorbed this news with remarkable composure. Will he try to take us away again? No, sweetheart, Elena assured him, pulling him close. He has no power anymore. All the evidence is public now, and his entire network has been dismantled. Besides, Richard added, you have us now. The adoption papers were finalized last week. Legally, you and Sophia are protected. The adoption had been Elena's idea, a way to ensure the children would have a guardian they trusted if anything ever happened to her. Richard had agreed immediately, his heart having claimed them as his own, long before any legal document made it official. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. Can we still go to the aquarium today? Sophia's been excited about seeing the dolphins. Richard marveled at the boy's resilience. After everything he'd been through, Tommy had somehow maintained his ability to focus on joy, on family, on the simple pleasures of being a child. Of course we can, Elena smiled. Go get cleaned up and we'll leave in an hour. After Tommy left, Elena turned to Richard. There's something else, isn't there? Something about James that's worrying you more than his capture. Richard nodded, pulling up another document on his computer. Before he was caught, he managed to transfer a large sum of money to an unknown account. The transaction patterns match those used by his old network. You think he still has allies out there, Elena concluded, her fingers already moving across her laptop keyboard. People who might want revenge, or people who might want to continue his work, Richard added grimly. The trafficking network was generating billions. Someone might try to rebuild it. Elena's screen filled with code as she accessed her monitoring systems. My network is still active, watching for any signs of their old patterns. If anyone tries to restart the operation, we'll know. But, Richard prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice, but we might need to be more proactive, she admitted. James knows things about the company, about your father, about what really happened 15 years ago, if he decides to talk. Let him, Richard said firmly. I've made peace with my past mistakes. The truth can't hurt us anymore. Elena smiled, touching his hand. The truth is what set us free. But there's still one piece of it we haven't shared. Something I discovered just before implementing Protocol Sundown. She opened a file on her laptop, showing him a series of documents that made his blood run cold. Your father didn't just disappear 20 years ago. He's been working against James's network the entire time, building his own resistance movement. He's alive, Richard whispered, staring at surveillance photos that clearly showed his father, older but unmistakable, meeting with government officials in various countries. Very much alive, Elena confirmed, and he wants to meet his grandchildren. The implications of this revelation threatened to overwhelm Richard, but a squeal of laughter from outside brought him back to the present. Sophia had discovered a seashell, and Tommy was helping her examine it with all the seriousness of a young scientist. When? Richard asked, his eyes still on the children. He's been waiting for my signal that it's safe, Elena replied. I could send it today if you're ready. Richard watched his family on the beach, the woman he had grown to love, the children who had changed his life, and the promise of reconciliation with a father he had thought lost forever. After the aquarium, he decided. Let's give the kids their dolphin day first. Elena's smile was radiant as she kissed him softly. Always thinking of them first. You've become quite the father yourself. Outside, Tommy had started singing the lullaby to Sophia, but the words were different now. A song of family found rather than family lost. The aquarium was a marvel of blue light and floating shapes, but Richard found himself watching the children more than the marine life. Tommy held Sophia up to each tank, patiently explaining the different fish species, his knowledge clearly bolstered by the marine biology books Elena had been buying him. Look, Sophia, Tommy exclaimed, pointing to a graceful manta ray gliding past. They're like underwater birds. Sophia pressed her tiny hands against the glass, giggling as the ray seemed to wave at her with its fins. At 18 months old, she was growing into a curious, happy toddler, the trauma of her early months fading into distant memory. Elena slipped her hand into Richard's, leaning against his shoulder. Happy? She asked softly. More than I ever thought possible, he replied honestly. The weight of his father's imminent return still pressed on his mind, but it couldn't diminish the joy of this moment. They moved through the exhibits, following Tommy's excited lead. The boy had developed a particular fascination with ocean life since moving to the beach house, spending hours reading about marine ecosystems and conservation efforts. "Did you know?" Tommy was telling Sophia as they watched tropical fish dart through coral formations. "The ocean is like a big computer network, with all the fish and plants connected to each other, just like Mama's system that helped us get home." Elena squeezed Richard's hand, both of them touched by Tommy's interpretation of ecological systems through the lens of his unique experiences. As they approached the dolphin exhibit, Richard's phone vibrated. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made his heart skip. "The dolphins were always your favorite. Remember how you used to press your face against the glass, just like your grandson is doing now?" Richard scanned the crowd, and there, standing quietly in a corner watching them with gentle eyes, was his father. 20 years older, his hair now white, but unmistakably the man who had taught Richard his first lessons about right and wrong. "Dad," Richard whispered. Elena touched his arm. "Go. Talk to him. We'll keep the children occupied with the dolphin show." Richard moved through the crowd as if in a dream. His father waited patiently, a soft smile on his weathered face. "You did well, son," Robert Evans said as Richard approached. "Better than I did. You chose the right path even if it took you a while to find it." "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard asked, his voice thick with emotion. "All these years, why didn't you let me know you were alive?" "Would you have believed the truth back then?" Robert replied gently. "About the trafficking, the corruption, how deep it all went. You needed to discover it for yourself to make your own choices." "I almost made the wrong one," Richard admitted, "when Elena first came to me with evidence." "But you didn't," Robert interrupted. "When it really mattered, when those children needed you, you chose love over fear, truth over power, just like Elena did." They both turned to watch the dolphin show. Tommy was explaining something to Sophia, his hands moving animatedly while Eleanor watched them with obvious pride. "They're remarkable children," Robert observed. "Tommy has his mother's intelligence and his sister's best interests always at heart. And little Sophia, she has your smile, you know, the same one you had at that age." Richard felt tears prick his eyes. "Would you like to meet them, properly?" "I'd love nothing more," Robert replied. "But first, there's something you need to know. The work isn't quite finished. James's old network," Richard guessed. "You've been tracking the remnants." Robert nodded. "There are still people out there trying to rebuild what we destroyed. They won't stop just because their leader was caught." "Let them try," Richard said firmly. "We're stronger now. Together." "Yes, you are," Robert agreed, pride evident in his voice. "And now you have me too, if you want." Richard's answer was interrupted by an excited shout. "Richard, the dolphins are doing tricks. You're missing it." Tommy was waving from the front row, his face lit with joy. Sophia bounced in Eleanor's lap, clapping her tiny hands at the aquatic display. "Go," Robert said softly. "Be with your family. We have time now to talk about everything else." But Richard shook his head, taking his father's arm. "Come with me. Meet your grandchildren. The rest can wait." As they joined Elena and the children, Tommy looked up curiously at the older man. Something in Robert's gentle eyes must have resonated with the perceptive boy because he suddenly smiled. "You look like Richard," Tommy observed. "Are you his papa?" "I am," Robert replied, kneeling down to the boy's level. "And I hear you're quite good with numbers and codes." Tommy's eyes lit up. "Mama taught me. Want to hear the lullaby? It's different now. It's about family and dolphins and love." Robert glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. As Tommy began to sing softly, his voice mixing with the sounds of splashing water and happy dolphins, Richard felt the last pieces of their family puzzle finally falling into place. The reunion at the aquarium had marked the beginning of a new chapter for the extended family. Robert Evans had moved into a cottage near the beach house, becoming a regular part of their daily lives. His experience in fighting corruption, combined with Elena's technical expertise and Richard's business acumen, created a formidable team dedicated to preventing the revival of James's network. One peaceful morning, as Robert taught Tommy to fish off the private dock, Elena's monitoring systems triggered an alert. She sat at her command center, frowning at the screens as Richard entered with Sophia in his arms. "What is it?" he asked, recognizing the concern in her expression. "Multiple hits on our warning system," Elena replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Someone's trying to access the old network's communication channels. They're using new encryption, but the patterns are familiar." Richard settled Sophia in her play area before joining Eleanor at the monitors. "James's people?" "No," Elena said grimly. "This is different, more sophisticated. Look at these signatures." The data streams flowing across her screens showed complex patterns that seemed vaguely familiar to Richard. Then it hit him. They resembled the security protocols his own company had used back before Elena had exposed the corruption. "These are corporate security measures," he said slowly. "High-level ones." Elena nodded. "Someone with access to major corporate resources is trying to rebuild the network, not from the criminal side, but from the legitimate business world." A soft knock at the door made them both turn. Tommy stood there, his fishing lesson apparently finished. His expression was serious beyond his years. "I know those patterns," he said quietly. "Papa used to make me memorize them before Mama helped us escape. He called them business insurance." Richard and Elena exchanged concerned glances. They had been careful not to discuss the ongoing investigation around the children, wanting to give them a chance at a normal life. But Tommy's unique knowledge could be crucial. "What do you remember about them, sweetheart?" Elena asked gently. Tommy approached the screens, his eyes scanning the data with remarkable comprehension. "They're like puzzle pieces. Each part connects to something else. Papa said they were worth more than money." He was right. Robert's voice came from the doorway. "Those protocols were designed to hide connections between legitimate businesses and criminal enterprises. I spent years trying to unravel them." Richard studied the patterns more closely. "These new attempts, they're coming from multiple points, but they all have something in common." He pointed to a recurring sequence in the data. "This is a trademark. Of Morton Industries." Elena's eyes widened. "The company that tried to buy out your shipping division last year." "The same," Richard confirmed. "They were very persistent, even after I refused their offer. Now we know why." "They're trying to recreate the smuggling routes," Robert concluded, "using legitimate business acquisitions to rebuild the trafficking infrastructure." Tommy had gone very quiet, his hand unconsciously reaching for Sophia's. The baby girl caught her brother's serious mood and crawled over to him, pulling herself up, using his leg for support. "They won't find us, will they?" Tommy asked, his voice small but steady. "Never," Elena said firmly, pulling her son into a hug. "We're safe here, but we need to stop them from hurting other families." Richard watched the embrace, his heart aching for the burden of knowledge these children carried, but then he noticed something in Tommy's expression, not fear, but determination. "The lullaby had more verses," Tommy said suddenly. "Parts Papa didn't know about. Mama added them later when she was teaching me about the network." Elena straightened, her eyes sharp with interest. "What kind of verses, Tommy?" "About the money, trails, how to follow them back to their source." Tommy closed his eyes, recalling the melody. "Through shadows deep and waters wide, follow where the numbers hide." Robert was already moving to another computer, pulling up financial records. The boy's right. The patterns in his song, their financial tracking codes. "Elena, you, brilliant woman, you hid the keys to tracking their money in a child's lullaby." "Not just tracking," Elena said, her fingers moving faster over the keyboard. "Those codes could let us freeze their assets before they can establish new routes." Richard's phone buzzed, an urgent message from his corporate security team. Morton Industries had just launched a hostile takeover bid for Evans Enterprises. "They're making their move," he said grimly, "trying to force their way in through the front door." But Eleanor was smiling, a fierce, triumphant expression. "Let them try. What they don't know is that we've been waiting for this. Protocol Sunrise is ready." "Sunrise?" Richard asked, surprised. I thought sundown was the final protocol. Sundown was for exposing the past, Elena explained. Sunrise is for protecting the future. She looked at Tommy, who was still holding Sophia close. Ready to sing a new verse, my brave boy? Tommy nodded, his voice clear and strong as he began the lullaby that would help safeguard other children from the fate he had barely escaped. Protocol. Sunrise unfolded like a digital dawn, spreading light into every dark corner of the financial world. As Tommy sang the complex sequences hidden in his lullaby, Eleanor's systems translated them into action, freezing suspicious accounts and exposing hidden connections. Richard watched in amazement as the hostile takeover attempt by Morton Industries imploded in real time. Their stock prices plummeted as evidence of their criminal intentions became impossible to hide. The beauty of Sunrise, Elena explained as they worked, is that it doesn't just stop them, it prevents anyone from trying the same thing again. The protocols Tommy's singing are being encoded into global financial security systems. Robert had set up a secure line to his international contacts, coordinating responses across multiple jurisdictions. Law enforcement teams are moving in worldwide. Morton's executives are being arrested in 15 countries. Tommy continued, singing, his young voice carrying the weight of justice as Sophia watched him with wide, understanding eyes. The baby seemed to sense the importance of the moment, staying unusually quiet in Richard's arms. The next part is crucial, Elena said, her attention focused on a particular data stream. Tommy, remember the verse about the golden threads? Tommy nodded, shifting the melody slightly. Golden threads in morning light follow where they lead the fight. Through the maze of ones and zeros, truth will make the darkness bright. The code embedded in the verse activated a new protocol, sending Helena's virus through the global banking network. But this wasn't a destructive force. It was a protective one, encoding safeguards that would recognize and prevent the patterns of human trafficking operations. It's beautiful, Richard murmured, watching the protective algorithms spread. You're not just stopping them, you're making it impossible for anyone to use the financial system for trafficking again. That was always the plan, Elena said softly, not just to expose the truth, but to change the system itself, to make it protect people instead of profits. A small hand tugged at Richard's sleeve. Tommy looked up at him with serious eyes. Is it working? Are other kids going to be safe now? Richard knelt down to the boy's level, still holding Sophia. Yes, Tommy. Thanks to you and your mother, a lot of children will be safe. Your lullaby is helping change the world. Sophia chose that moment to reach for her brother, babbling happily. Tommy took her hand, and for a moment the two children seemed to glow in the light from Eleanor's screens, symbols of the innocence they were fighting to protect. Robert approached, placing a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. Your mother told me how you never forgot a single number, no matter how long you had to hide. You're a hero, young man. Tommy blushed but stood straighter. I just did what Mama taught me. She's the real hero. We all are, Elena said, finally turning from her computers. Every person who chooses to fight for what's right, to protect those who can't protect themselves, they're all heroes. The screens showed the final stages of Protocol Sunrise completing its work. Around the world, corrupt networks were being dismantled, not by force but by simply making their operations impossible to hide or fund. There will be pushback, Robert warned. People with this much power don't give it up easily. Let them try, Richard said firmly. We're ready. We have Elena's protocols, your international contacts, my corporate resources, and most importantly, he looked at his family gathered. Around him, we have each other. Tommy yawned, the excitement and concentration finally catching up with him. Eleanor smiled fondly at her son. Time for a real lullaby, I think, one about happy things. As she led the children to their rooms, Richard and Robert stayed behind, watching the final results of Protocol Sunrise unfold across the screens. You know, Robert said quietly, when I first went into hiding to fight this network, I thought I was sacrificing my family to save others. I never imagined I'd end up gaining a bigger family instead. Richard thought about the twists of fate, that had brought them all together. A desperate boy in a hospital corridor, a brave woman who never stopped fighting for justice, and a baby whose innocent need for protection had sparked a revolution. Family, he realized, is what makes all of this worth fighting for. From down the hall came the soft sound of Elena singing to the children, not codes or protocols now, but a simple song of love and safety and home. In that moment, as Protocol Sunrise completed its work, around the world, Richard knew that they had achieved something even greater than justice. They had created hope. 6 months after Protocol Sunrise, the beach house had transformed into a true home. Family photos lined the walls, Sophia's artwork decorated the refrigerator, and Tommy's marine biology projects filled a special shelf in the living room. The scars of the past were healing, replaced by the warmth of new memories. Elena sat on the patio watching Tommy teach Sophia about the different seashells they had collected that morning. Her laptop was open beside her, but for once she wasn't monitoring global security networks. Instead, she was writing a children's book, the story of a brave boy and his baby sister, told in a way that would inspire without frightening. The publisher loved the first draft, Richard said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. They think it could help other children who've been through trauma. Eleanor accepted the coffee gratefully. Tommy helped me with it. He said it was important to show that even scary stories can have happy endings. They watched as Sophia carefully placed a tiny shell in her collection box, beaming with pride as Tommy praised her choice. At 2 years old, she was growing into a cheerful, confident toddler, her early trauma transformed into resilience by the love that surrounded her. "Mr. Evans," Tommy called out. Using the formal name he still sometimes fell back on when excited. "Can we show Sophia the surprise now?" Richard checked his watch and nodded. Perfect timing. Grandpa Robert should be here any minute. The surprise had been weeks in the planning. A small tide pool they had created at the edge of their private beach, carefully stocked with local sea life that Tommy could use to teach Sophia about marine ecosystems. Robert had helped design it, drawing on his engineering background to ensure it would be safe and sustainable. As if on cue, Robert appeared around the corner of the house, carrying what looked like scientific equipment. "Ready for our marine biology lesson?" Sophia clapped her hands in excitement, while Tommy rushed to help carry the gear. The boy had flourished under his grandfather's mentorship, developing a passionate interest in both technology and nature. "Before we start," Elena said, closing her laptop, "there's something we should tell the children." Richard took her hand, knowing what was coming. They had discussed this moment for weeks, waiting for the right time. "Tommy, Sophia," Elena began, gathering her children close, "how would you feel about having a new baby brother or sister?" Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? You're going to have a baby?" Elena nodded, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "In about 7 months, you're going to be a big brother again." Sophia, not fully understanding but catching the excitement, hugged her mother's legs. "Baby?" "That's right, Princess," Richard said, lifting her up. "You're going to be a big sister, just like Tommy is your big brother." Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing the news. "Will I teach the baby the lullaby too?" "A new version," Elena assured him. "One about family and love and the ocean. No more hiding codes, just happy songs for happy children." Robert watched the scene with misty eyes. "Life has a way of coming full circle," he said softly. "From darkness to light, from fear to love." "Speaking of which," Richard added, "we have something else to share." He pulled out an envelope from his pocket. "The International Court just released their final ruling. James and his remaining associates will never be able to hurt anyone again. Their assets have been converted into a fund for helping trafficking victims." "And Morton Industries?" Tommy asked, showing his deep understanding of recent events. "Transformed," Elena explained. "Under new leadership, they're using their resources to fight trafficking instead of enabling it. Your lullaby helped change not just the system, but the people within it." Sophia, growing restless with all the talking, pointed eagerly at the tide pool. "Fish? Show fish." They all laughed. the serious moment breaking into joy. As they gathered around the small marine habitat, Tommy began explaining to his sister about the different creatures living there, his voice carrying the same gentle patience Eleanor had always used with him. "Watch this," he said, pointing to a small hermit crab. "See how it carries its home on its back? But when it finds a safe place with family, it can come out and explore." Richard wrapped his arm around Elena's waist, his hand resting gently on her stomach where their new child was growing. Symbolism of Tommy's words wasn't lost on any of the adults. "You know," Robert said, helping Sophia dip her toes in the shallow water, "when I first started fighting against trafficking, I never imagined it would end like this, with family, with hope, with new life." Elena leaned into Richard's embrace. "That's the real victory, isn't it? Not just stopping the bad things, but building something beautiful in their place." As the sun began to set over the ocean, Tommy started singing. Not the old lullaby of codes and hiding, but a new song he had created himself about the sea and the stars and the endless love of family. Sophia joined in with her baby voice, and soon they were all singing together, their voices carrying across the waves like a promise of better days to come. The morning sun painted the ocean in shades of gold as Elena stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting on her growing belly. 7 months had passed since the announcement of her pregnancy, and the baby was due any day now. The house was filled with the quiet energy of anticipation. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, carefully wrapping a small package, a gift for his new sibling. Inside was a handmade book where he had written down all the safe, happy versions of the lullaby, illustrated with his own drawings of their family and the sea. "Do you think the baby will like it?" he asked, meticulously tying a blue ribbon around the package. "The baby will love it," Elena assured him, "just like Sophia loves the songs you sing to her." As if on cue, Sophia's voice floated down from upstairs, where Richard was helping her get dressed. The 3-year-old was singing her own version of Tommy's ocean songs, mixing up the words but capturing perfectly the joy behind them. Robert arrived just as Richard and Sophia came downstairs, carrying a small aquarium. "A welcome gift for the new arrival," he explained, setting it up in the living room. "Something to watch and wonder about." Inside, tiny seahorses danced among swaying seaweed, their graceful movements almost hypnotic. Sophia pressed her face against the glass, enchanted. "Pretty," she declared, "for baby." The family gathered around the aquarium, watching the peaceful scene within. These quiet moments had become precious to them all, reminders of how far they had come from the days of fear and hiding. "I had a dream last night," Tommy said suddenly, "about Mama's old office and all the computers and the scary times, but it wasn't scary anymore. In the dream, all the screens showed pictures. Save our family instead of codes." Eleanor hugged him close. "That's because those times are over, sweetheart. The codes did their job. They helped us find our way to this new life." Richard watched his family with pride. The past year had brought changes he could never have imagined when he first met a desperate little boy in a hospital corridor. His company had been transformed, now leading global efforts to protect vulnerable children. Robert had emerged from hiding to become a beloved grandfather. And Elena. Elena had not only given him a family, but had shown him what real strength looked like. She had turned her trauma into triumph, her fear into fierce protection, and her technical brilliance into a force for good that would protect children for generations to come. "I've been thinking," Tommy said, still working on his gift, "when the baby comes, can I be the one to teach them about the ocean, like Grandpa taught me?" "Of course," Richard replied. "You'll be an amazing teacher, just like you are with Sophia." Sophia nodded seriously. "Tommy, best teacher. Show baby fish and shells." The morning light strengthened, filling the room with warmth. The seahorses in their new aquarium cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating patterns that reminded them of gentler codes, nature's own algorithms of beauty and grace. "You know what today is?" Elena asked softly. 1 year ago exactly. A brave little boy walked into a hospital, holding his baby sister and hoping for a miracle. Tommy looked up from his wrapping. "And we found one. We found you and Richard and Grandpa." "No, my darling," Eleanor said, tears shining in her eyes. "You were the miracle. Your courage, your love for your sister, Your perfect memory of every code I taught you, you saved us all. Richard moved to stand behind Elena, his hands joining hers over their unborn child. Sophia climbed into Tommy's lap, and Robert watched, them all with grateful eyes. "Should we sing the new lullaby?" Tommy suggested, "the happy one about our family?" And so they did, their voices joining in harmony as the sun rose higher over their beach house sanctuary. The song spoke not of hiding or running, but of love and trust and the unbreakable bonds of family. It was a song of triumph, of healing, of new beginnings. As they sang, Elena felt the baby move, as if responding to the music. Soon there would be another voice joining their chorus, another heart beating in rhythm with their song of love and redemption. The past could not be changed, but it had led them here, to this moment, this family, this love. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.